The Brandon Best Podcast. Episode 0. New pod, who dis? Follow on Instagram or Twitter at the Brandon M. Best for updates, to give feedback, and to get involved in the conversation.
Okay, back into the podcasting world. This is my personal podcast, the Brandon Best Podcast. What is this podcast going to be about? I kind of wanted to start this just kind of my own personal audio blog, I guess is the best way to put it. Traditional blogs didn't really appeal to me since I don't really consider myself much of a writer, I would say. So, and I also had some experience podcasting before, so it was kind of a medium I was comfortable in and like doing. So this is going to be kind of just me using this personally to talk about things I'm experiencing right now or working towards. Sometimes people know I work on apps and trying to build startups and whatnot, so maybe some aspects of that whole journey. And then as well, maybe some book reviews. I tend to read a fair amount, so maybe talking about, whatever I'm reading, probably some current events and whatever else, some thoughts I'm having and having some inner monologues about, and kind of do them out in the open. I thought would be kind of an interesting experiment. So that's kind of what's going to be entailed in this podcast. So some of the episodes might appeal to you, some of them might not, but that's all right. And I guess I kind of wanted to do this because from my previous podcasting experience, I really liked long-form conversation, in-depth conversation. This is kind of an aspect that I would say not many people get to do very often. How often do you just sit down with someone and have a conversation for 2 hours? It doesn't really happen. So I wanted to kind of get back to that. And it's kind of this thought that I've been having about production versus consumption. And most of us are very not preoccupied, but we tend to do more consuming than producing. So you're, listening to a podcast, you're watching, TV, YouTube, any form of entertainment like that. You're, reading, playing video games, stuff like that. You're just consuming other people's content. And I wanted to try and do more producing. I guess I'm lucky enough that my job and my profession is producing software engineering. You're creating something. And I think having a sense of that, having kind of experience doing that, I see how gratifying it is to be able to produce something rather to consume. So I wanted to, pick up another hobby. I realized I didn't really have a hobby outside of what I do for work, and then my other hobby, kind of air quotes, is trying to build companies. So it didn't seem I needed to do something that was completely different and out of those realms. So here I am back podcasting. So that's kind of more or less why I wanted to do it. Trying to do some more production than consumption. What are some other topics I might touch on? Not life events, current events, like I said. Some topics might come up that I'm just really interested in, like to talk about, just like other podcasters tend to bring up certain things over and over again. As of right now, I don't really have a setup for doing like a two-person episode or like an interview style, but maybe down the road that might be something that we would want to do some interview styles, let someone else talk for a change. So, an intro to me, I guess, for those who are listening who don't know who I am. I was born in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, grew up in the Edmonton area, which is in Alberta, one of the western provinces of Canada. Pretty regular childhood, growing up in a suburb just outside of Edmonton, actually. Playing competitive sports growing up, got really into kind of gaming and technology, which and then she led me to pursue computer science at the university in Edmonton, the University of Alberta. And I actually just recently completed that degree about a year ago now, and I'm just working full time as a software engineer. So that's like the quick and clean explanation, kind of background on who I am, what I'm, I guess, up to right now, and maybe some of the things I might talk about. Would be so obviously there's this whole COVID-19 kind of pandemic happening at the moment, that a lot of people are obviously going through a lot of trying times with the quarantine, losing jobs. Before all this went down, I was actually planning to move back to Toronto. I lived there. I went back and lived there for a little bit while I was doing a internship, and that was a lot of fun. Going to a new city is always a fun adventure, and I had a lot of fun there. It's weird. You live in a city like Edmonton, so Edmonton has about, I think the Edmonton area only has maybe 1.2 million people, I would say, and it sounds like, oh yeah, it's one of the major cities in our province and even in our country. And then you go to, a city like Toronto that has like 5 times the amount of people, and that's like a real big city. So it was a it was a fun experience. I always like going to visit because I got lots of family out there. But yeah, I'm basically made the decision that I was going to move back there for career purposes. For the most part, that was like the big motivating factor. Being a tech worker, kind of in that industry, Toronto's actually had a huge, I don't know if I want to say not resurgence, but they've basically become one of the big players in terms of tech ecosystems in North America, up there with, the Silicon Valleys, and New York is, those are, I think, the two top big ones out of the U.S. And actually, in 2017, I believe Toronto had more tech job offerings, actually, than San Francisco. So there, it's like big. Lots of companies are moving there, their headquarters there, or opening offices. And there's just a real, lots of like money floating around in high velocity for investment. So basically, I just wanted to move there to pursue kind of the startup dream, making my own startup and going big and maybe getting acquired and making a bunch of money and all that. So back to kind of the whole pandemic thing, I had a job lined up going there, which was awesome. Um, but unfortunately, they were tied to the travel industry, which took a really big hit. So they actually had to rescind the job offer, which is unfortunate, but obviously understandable. That industry as a whole is getting completely hammered right now. I know WestJet, one of the major airlines, I think laid off like, I want to say 40% of their staff, which is huge. That could be inaccurate, but I knew it was a substantial number of their workers actually got laid off. So as of right now, I'm just in the process of trying to find a new job. I know most of the tech companies are still moving. A lot of them already adopted the kind of culture of allowing remote work, having remote workers, or allowing people to work from home anyway. So it wasn't a massive kind of switch to how they work. Most of them are still operating just fine, especially if their products or services are completely software based. So that's always, it sucks because for those who don't know, the interview process for a software engineer can actually be pretty rigorous. You essentially get these coding tasks that you have to do, and either it's on your own, but maybe there's a time constraint, or you have to do it live in front of the interviewer, whether it's on a whiteboard or maybe you're doing the interview like on a Zoom call, so you have to like share a screen basically and type your code. There's other platforms that allow you to do it, but and you have to like solve these tricky problems that they try and give you, and it's just to evaluate your problem solving ability, and it's pretty stressful. You have to almost like review your entire CS degree before you go into some of these interviews because you don't really know kind of the breadth of what they're going to ask you. These are usually more than one challenge. I know the last one interview I did for that previous job I was going to go work at, I ended up doing actually, I believe it was in total five coding challenges. So it was a lot. I mean, the last kind of stage of the interview process was 5 hours long. So they kind of run you through the gauntlet, and it's pretty exhausting. Um, so I'm not excited to go through that whole process again, but it's nice to know that I've been through it once and I've successfully landed a job. So hopefully that's some confidence that I'll be able to do it again. And that's kind of what I'm working towards right now. Fortunately, my girlfriend has a job lined up, which is nice. So we have that secured. But I'm trying to staying fairly optimistic about getting something going and being prepared and set up for whatever I can get and have some actual proof of, I guess, income before we go and get an apartment here in a couple weeks. So that is kind of how COVID has, I guess, really majorly impacted me as of late. Besides the quarantine, I know a lot of other people have lost a great deal more. I would imagine it's interesting how interconnected everything is. On the one side of the world, there's just a unknowing lack of knowledge when it comes to hygiene, food hygiene, and that results in people all over the world losing millions of dollars related to the stock market, people losing jobs, people having to go on welfare or some semblance of UBI. It kind of shows how interconnected I guess everything is, especially if you see some of these simulations or even just cell phone tracking data. You can see they did it for the spring breakers down in Miami. They actually tracked all their cell phone signals from the beach and then showed how they kind of spread after spring break ended, and it was like insane how much they all went, not only throughout the U.S. but basically all over the world. So it kind of puts in perspective just how interconnected all the areas are in. So who knows how long it's gonna last? I'm trying to not get too bent out of shape about it. I was supposed to have convocation for my graduation, but that's just going to be virtual and that's going to be postponed. Most things are postponed or outright canceled, but I think the important thing is to just stay healthy. Obviously, you can always go to the beach or with your friends or do whatever it is, hit some patios. I know that's what most people are missing here out where I am in Alberta now that it's become nice and warm and finally summer. There's going to be other opportunities to do that, but this is kind of taking precedence, and it's just kind of unprecedented. I think everyone's kind of just thrown off about what how serious it became and all the measures that are being imposed. But I definitely seeing and hearing about some examples of other countries. It seems like it could be a lot worse. So at least in the area that I'm at, it's not terrible as of yet, which is a good thing. It's pretty impressive to see, you go to a grocery store, even with the mad craze, and somehow, one day all the shelves are empty, and then the next day they're completely stocked. And it kind of puts in perspective, how rigorous and how well oiled a machine is of our food supply chain, and how that system has been, obviously it's probably could be disrupted, just thinking from a kind kind of entrepreneurial tech standpoint, all those kind of industries are ripe for disruption and to be, kind of revamped and overhauled and improved. But it's pretty unreal how all these grocery stores, if you think about all the grocery stores that are probably in your city, if you live in a larger kind of metropolis area, and think about it, the tons of food that fill and make up all those grocery stores, and how all these supply chains are actually able to more or less keep them stocked is pretty. I mean, it's something to applaud, I would say, and it kind of makes you. I don't know if you have a humanist outlook, probably could almost feel a sense of pride, being like, oh, humans were able to build this and it works and it does its purpose and it could operate under the most extreme kind of conditions and dynamics of the environment. So that's kind of I don't know. That's something I thought of when I walked through the grocery store one day and mostly everything was gone, and the next day everything was kind of more or less restocked. One thing I think people are struggling with this whole situation is knowing, when can you start thinking past quarantine life? When can I start making plans to do stuff that don't revolve around social distancing, not traveling, whatever it may be that you can't do right now? It seems no one has really any concrete answers as to how long this could take and how long it's going to be. And it's a little ironic because we live in the age of information. Data is more valuable a resource than oil now. The fact that there is more information floating around freely available than ever before in human history, information is as accessible as it's ever been. I can basically look up anything with my phone or my computer that I want and almost instantaneously get the answer. Yet it seems to be near impossible to get a concrete answer when it comes to this whole pandemic because there's so much information with so many sources and so many differing opinions and timelines of when this information came out that it's actually harder to get an answer as if it were maybe, I don't know, let's just say like before the age of the internet where you had to get all your information from the radio or the news or just straight from the government via those channels. So it's ironic to think about how more information is available than ever, yet it's almost impossible to make sense of it all because it's basically information overload. What is the answer to it? No idea. I know a lot of, specifically Twitter, just because of the nature of the platform, it's all public discourse, especially through text. They have a lot of issues with discerning context when people are saying stuff, whether it's a joke or not, and then they get wrongfully banned. To be able to kind of sift through, make algorithms to sift through all this information and be like, oh, this is, to say, fake news, let's say. This is outdated information now. This had came from a study where they had to do a retraction. There's lots of companies struggling with how to sift through all this information and figure out what's true and what isn't, and what's outdated and what still stands to be true, and kind of fit that all within the context of the topic, the time frame, and also the source it's coming from. It's like incredibly computers as of this point in time can understand context very well, and that's been shown through Twitter's struggles with people being banned and censorship, and I think also Facebook with in terms of ads, and I think allowing what ads are appropriate and which aren't, which are slanderous and untrue, misleading, or just straight up misinformation. I think they had an issue with maybe anti-vaccination ads or something like that. It's actually a real big problem when it comes to kind of information processing, I guess you could call it. When are algorithms going to be good enough to deal with context? And if they can, how does our current, social media landscape change, and will it help improve what what it is that is Twitter, that is Facebook, that is basically public Discord? It could radically change it and help it and have us, communicate better as, I guess, a species, considering you can talk to anyone and everyone essentially 24/7 whenever you want, which is also a really weird thought. Like a good point about Twitter that was made. I can't remember what podcast it was. I can't remember who said it, but the fact that, let's just say before Twitter or social media, back when you're growing up, think of like a celebrity you really liked. So for me, it was like Jim Carrey. I love Jim Carrey, love the movies, The Mask, and like Ace Ventura and all that. And there's like no way I could ever somehow get in contact with Jim Carrey whatsoever. I'd have no avenues of talking to him, sending him a message. It's like completely impossible. Yet today, through something like Twitter, I can literally go and talk at basically any celebrity I want on demand, and they more or less would see it. Let's just assume they will, but obviously some of them just deal with vast amounts of interactions that come flying at them. There's no way they can process all of them, and they probably just ignore the vast majority of them. But the fact that you can actually send a message to someone that you would otherwise have no access to, and they will get it. It's just a matter of them actually reading it and replying, is really weird. And because it's such a new thing, and because it's come on so quickly, a lot of people argue, and I would agree with the sentiment that we as a species haven't actually figured out how to do public discourse on like a grand scale. And it actually kind of comes to this one book I actually read recently, Sapiens by Yuval Harari, I believe the author's name was, and it's basically about how like our species Homo sapiens got to this point today, and it talks about some of the differences between Homo sapiens, like Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and why exactly we were the ones to survive and thrive, and even theoretically maybe genocided those other species. And one of the factors is that Homo sapiens are able to cooperate in groups flexibly. So this kind of allowed us to coordinate. There's other examples of apes like chimpanzees and stuff able to do this, but because I guess given a certain amount of intellect, there's a bunch of points made as to, and actually technological revolutions made that allowed larger and larger sizes of groups of people to be able to cooperate flexibly. That's why we have, I guess, larger and larger cities of people living together, and it actually works out, and we can kind of make it not all crumble to the ground and people freak out and riots in the street. We're actually able to cooperate on grand scales. And I think there's a lot of parallels between that and the conversation of public discourse in terms of social media. I think it's maybe this is the final, not the final, but this is as far as we can go being a kind of uniplanetary species right now. Being able to can we learn how to use this newfound power of talking to anyone, anywhere, at any time to bring the kind of collective ability to cooperate in large groups to the global scale. can we master that? Because if you think about what groups of people are able to do if they're galvanized towards a specific goal. I mean, you can think of any army, any company that's built something really aggressive. Usually the rocket companies, the space companies are really good examples of this. Even if you want to go back and talk about like the pyramids, if you don't believe in aliens coming down and teaching the Egyptians how to build them, that if you can take, 1,000, even 1,000, let's say like 50,000, no, let's say 10,000 people that are working day and night towards one goal, I think you'd be surprised as to how much you could actually build. And I think that's why I use the example of the pyramids. Is like it's unreal. Scientists are like confused as to how they were able to do it. But that's because they had like a million slaves that were all galvanized in that instance, but forced into working towards a common goal. So if you think about that, and if you think about even what a few thousand, construction workers and engineers can build in terms of, big football stadiums and whatnot, what if you were to get, a million engineers, a million scientists of all different backgrounds working towards one common goal for, however long it took? Think you'd probably be astonished to the magnitude of what that group can build. I think. So it'd be interesting if we can, like, once again expand that circle of how people can cooperate together. I think that's the next step. That's maybe a prerequisite that is needed before we start doing things that are not necessarily sci-fi, but maybe more of the people who maybe label themselves as futurists think we need to accomplish to get to the next level, so to speak. But that remains to be seen. It's probably going to be really hard, especially since discourse and context and all this stuff it's semantics, it's abstract, it's not concrete. I'm not a linguist or even, someone who has a doctorate in English. But I would imagine it'll be very difficult to kind of make an experiment or run experiments to prove that, or to help kind of solve the riddle of context in public discourse. We might be a ways off from that, but that's where really intelligent, truly intelligent AI comes into play. Can we make something that can learn it for us at a way faster rate and then just kind of give us the answer? Or we'll all just be quarantined for the rest of our days. Who knows? Watching Tiger King over and over. Okay, well, I think I'm going to cut it off there for today. Well, first of all, thanks for sitting through this. Hopefully it was kind of interesting. I'll see what I'm going to do for the next following episodes. They're probably going to change format every time, just depending on what I have to talk about or what's going on. I guess if you want to stay updated with the podcast, I'll probably just use my social media to do that. So you do follow me, Instagram and Twitter. I just got Twitter. Still not sure what I want to do with it, how I'm going to use it, but probably mostly podcast promotion. But you can follow me on both of those at the Brandon M Best. So the Brandon and then the letter M Best. Instagram, Twitter, and I'll see you guys next time.